Hello, everyone. Welcome to Weekends with Amit. The topic that we are going to discuss is grave. The whole world is talking about it. In fact, if anyone is unaware of this going around, then the person is really, really disconnected. Before we get into the topic, let me welcome Professor Amit Goswami, who will be on the show today.
Hi, Krishna. Hello, everyone.
Welcome. The topic that we are going to discuss today is quantum activism and the threat of climate change. Now, what we generally see or we receive feedback from our viewers, listeners, they say that the quantum worldview or quantum activism is somehow intertwined with most of the thing that goes on. And there is this view that, well, can it really look at such grave things? Things like global warming, things that are practically endangering the evolution of human species. Can scientific or can quantum activism do something about it? So this is the question.
Yes, good question. So, quantum worldview, as you remember, says something about the world and about us, which is very important. It gives us a voice. We can do something. And so far in the discussion, this is one thing that is missing, sadly. We just had a global conference of leaders getting together in Glasgow and talk about climate change. It's, uh, of course, not very successful, but this is what to expect in the political situation. We'll come to that in a bit. Uh, the political situation is difficult. But very little awareness today about what we ordinary people can do. This is very different than when Club of Rome posited the issue of global warming and climate change uh, back in the 70s. When there was an awareness, I know because I taught a course, started teaching a course at the University of Oregon almost immediately as the Club of Rome report came up. That was 1971. And the course was on energy and environment. And I was concerned, communicated to the students, and they were concerned. And in those days, we used to talk about what we can do as well as what businesses can do, what as a society we can do, what governments can do. Um, of course, energy crisis was big event at that time because the oil crisis was going to show up, and it did show up. And at that time, there was a piece of data which showed that the oil reserves may be very finite, maybe already at an end, which of course proved wrong. Many, many new sources were discovered, and that changed our oil outlook. And of course, shale oil became available recently technologically at great environmental cost, but you know, the environment has been the least concern of politicians and businesses. Profit is the motive for politicians. They need the money from businesses, so they don't really touch the profit motive or businesses in any serious way. So there was a lot of talk about what we can do. And we, of course, in that course, I remember talking about conservation, and not conservation of energy as in physical law, but conservation as something as a modus operandi, as a lifestyle that we can adopt uh, uh, in ordinary life for every citizen in every part of the world, because we noticed how much we waste. Wastefulness is more prominent in the rich countries, such as in America. At that time, the data was horrendous. Like America had 5% of people and it consumed up 30% of global synergy. So the data is not as bad now because China has caught up a lot, India has caught up a lot, uh, Russia has become a producer nation and all that. But overall, very strangely, nobody talks about conservation as a solution anymore. This is very interesting because the economy already, as I pointed out in a book called Quantum Economics, depends on consumer demand more and more and more and more. Consumers keep economy alive. And so the cost, the standard of living has to go up, and consumers have to spend money, and this is what driving everything. So nobody talks about consumers slowing down in their uh, energy demand because that will produce a spin on the economy everywhere in the world. So uh, this is really the problem for quantum activists to talk about. Quantum activism is where we apply quantum principles to our life, to change lifestyle according to the worldview. We are the world, we accept the responsibility, and we do things that are necessary in order the world can function. And that includes the physical environment of the world. If we are completely unaware that what this materialist version of capitalism may not have to be designed like this, as I have shown in my book, Quantum Economics, but it is the materialist version in which you only have the material sector of economy. There is no other sector because nothing else exists. Everything is play of matter. And therefore you get into this idea that in order to keep economy going, you have to have more and more material goods. And as you know, COVID has contributed in this too, and COVID will continue in some form or other. And so this shift that has occurred under COVID, that we no longer are a service-oriented economy, but more a goods-oriented economy. So that makes energy demand even more. So this is the problem that we talk about less oil and less gas and less coal, and then what happens is that the demand of energy goes up and up, and alternative sustainable energy sources like solar, wind, or the still somewhat risky source of nuclear energy cannot cope up with it, cannot cope up with the demand. And this is what is going on. And this is something about which we can do something. We can do something. The consumers can do something.
Well, essentially, what you are saying is that, let's say I'm a consumer, I am used to a certain degree of comfort, and it is my aspiration to be even more comfortable, to have more things to enjoy. And this is creating the problem. This upward inclination to enjoy or indulge in pleasure more and more is the root cause of the problem. Now, the question arises, for general people, uh, enjoying pleasure is a very important part of life. And if we tell them, well, you know, you can't do that, because then you will not be there to enjoy what all those things, because the world is not going to be there. It's a very hard thing. So how do we communicate that message from the quantum worldview to people who are only seeking pleasure?
Yes, that is the problem, no? I mean, what has happened is that look, it is hard not to use the word conspiracy because it almost seems like that. You know, in the 1950s, we used to talk about military industrial complex and how it is controlling our mindset. And then we changed that to military, academe, and industrial complex. And now it is information technology, industrial complex, academe, big forces, and uh, they are shaping the worldview. How it was done is amazing. In the 60s, materialists started making noise that we don't need values. Values were one of the checks on pleasure, uh, but scientists started more and more taking sides with no values can exist because all is matter. And then in the 1980s, they declared that all is matter, period. All other metaphysics of idealism based on consciousness must be humbug. This which was called debunking or deconstruction. That's a more formal word. And what happened, of course, materialism is obviously inapplicable to the human being because we know what we experience. We do experience spirituality, we do experience expansion of consciousness, and we do know that there are alternatives to pleasure. Because when you expand the consciousness, our consciousness, the way we experience the world, it expands. It expands and it gives us happiness. And that is milder, but still a sustainable and solid alternative to pleasure. And this is, of course, what the quantum worldview teaches. However, what happened was that the religions reacted very badly and become anti-science because science lost credibility as a result of this myopic outlook. And ever since, religions, instead of coming strong that look, values really exist, instead they do the opposite number. They too become cynical. So the religious opposition to science consists of things like no abortion or no euthanasia, that kind of thing. They don't talk about how the values can bring about this idea of happiness being a substitute for pleasure, how if we refocus sexuality, and it is time to do that. We already focus sexuality once from sex for reproduction to sex for pleasure. It is time to refocus the role of sex to sex for love. And love expands our consciousness. Love reduces the need for other kind of high standard of living in the form of pleasure, in the form of surplus. Love fills up some of those needs because it's an enormously satisfying experience. So, in this way, of course, materialists who said there is nothing called love, values don't exist. But the point is that this is just plain wrong. And now in quantum science, you have already established both theoretically and experimentally that love is real. Vital energies, which is the focus of love, which we feel at the heart, these are very real things. And we become healthy for it. We become mentally and physically healthy if we have love in our life. This is proven every day when we fight COVID much more successfully if we have love in our life than not. We also consume much less if we have love in our life than not. This is the part we have to emphasize. And then the problem is not as hard The problem right now is that however much you do, if the consumer demand on energy goes up and up, there is no way that we can eliminate coal and oil and gas from the economy, from the consumption to produce this ever growing demand on energy, and that is going to pollute the environment. People talk instead of, okay, carbon tax does nothing. Carbon tax does not reduce carbon because people will go on demanding. Tax will only push up the cost of energy. Similarly, if you talk about we have the technology to subtract carbon from the environment without mentioning how much it will cost. Usually, for such things, the cost will be prohibitive. They are not solutions. They will create only more problems. Electric car is emphasized hugely. Is it a solution to anything? As people, knowledgeable people are already aware, and they do talk somewhat privately that no, it is not really a solution because you have to produce electricity. And how do you produce electricity in a country like India? You have to depend on coal. This solar energy deployment has been so backward in countries like India, it will take years to catch up with China or even the United States, where it's not that strong either. So when it comes to practicality, this kind of pessimism that we found in Glasgow is much more realistic than the optimism that we found in Paris because governments are not going to deliver, period. Just as America did not deliver. Well, they were a bit honest that they withdrew from the Paris Agreement. I'm not supporting withdrawal, but the point is that even if they did not withdraw, nothing was happening. They could not keep up. So this is the problem. This is the problem that we have to face. Okay, you speak.
Well, this is a situation that you are describing is very dangerous because in the short term, it is the governments who have to take some calls, hard calls, and do things that may not be popular. And being politicians, popularity is all people need to have, at least in democratic countries. Now, this is a catch-22 situation. So, how do you think, ideally, the governments can be influenced to do something? Or is it that quantum activism can really make some effective changes in mid to long term? If there are any prescriptive methods for that?
Well, the best thing in quantum worldview is that we recognize the importance of movement of consciousness. It is important for capitalism going. For example, what Adam Smith theorized as the invisible hand of the free market, we now know that there is no such invisible hand of the free market, but there is movement of consciousness, ethical, purposive movement of consciousness. And if we abide by them, indeed, capitalism can be formulated in a quite a sustainable economics. What changed is that that formulation was more and more lost because under the attack of materialism, ethics practically disappeared from all societies and culture, and creativity likewise, because if archetypes, stuff that we intuit, the values that we experience, that obeying that satisfies our higher needs and therefore reduces lower needs, as Maslow pointed out a long time ago, those things become difficult to install. So, on the whole, we are going very much against the movement of consciousness, and this is why our economy is always threatened by instability. When the floor is going to drop from our feet, we just don't know. And this is besides the problem of global climate change. Is there hope in this situation? Quantum worldview is giving us an answer. The same movement of consciousness is also taking us towards robotics. More and more human beings are automatizing all the professions that previously used human labor. Now, more and more human labor will be replaced by machines, robots. And when that happens, humans will have nothing to do. Now, imagine how the economy will go for the humans have nothing to do. You cannot run an economy with robotics. Yes, the economy becomes very efficient and all that, but who will consume and how do you get money that with which to consume? And also, if you don't have anything to do, what will you do? If your mind is a devil's workshop, does not even recognize the human values to follow, higher needs to follow. If we follow only survival, we become like animals. We'll compete and we will kill each other, and that's what will happen. Environmental concern is as far from us as can be when that kind of situation develops. So automatically, what will happen that humans will be forced to look at other things, other ways that the economy can proceed, as I have shown in quantum economics, subtle economy based on healthcare, economy based on mental health care, economy based on educating people on values, economy based on love, wholeness, this kind of thing, economy based on increased vitality and well-being of people. Such an economy can be developed if a proper market can be developed for it. Is this the way movement of consciousness is going? Could very well be. Robotics is one step, but the next step is, of course, an utter failure of materialist science to deal with this problem as it's developing. So, what the meeting of Glasgow, or coming down from the lofty ambitions of Paris Accord to Glasgow Accord, this huge watering down that happened, is a reminder that the solution is not going to be found with materialism. Solution has to be found by finding the alternative worldview that is already developing, that is already the case if scientists heeded to the experimental data that new science, even traditional neuroscience, is giving us. There's no doubt anymore that non-locality is real. In face of non-locality, who can justify materialist philosophy? Matter cannot interact non-locally. Matter cannot even simulate non-locality, as the great Richard Feynman pointed out long ago. Materialism is debunked philosophy. That's what has been deconstructed again and again recently. But so long as we are unable to uh, emphasize that point to people, how will the worldview change? The vested interest will never give up, just as religion has not given up their view of evolution. They never will. Similarly, these scientists, materialist scientists, will never give up the military industrial technological complex. They will never give up their stand. Their livelihood depends on it. As Upton Sinclair said many years ago, if something depends, your livelihood depends on something, you cannot give up that something. It's just that simple. So people have to be attended to, they have to hear us, and they have to change their modus operandi, their lifestyle. This is a very hard question, and I don't have any answer really how to do it in view of the fact that the media is totally materialist. Media only talk about problems, 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 because that's the way they can keep people interested in 24/7 news cycle. Even good things that the liberal news people tend to support, Good things get lost because of their hunger for the bad things. So, in this climate, it is very hard to see how we are going to change the public habits, the consuming habits, this ever increasing demand on energy and pleasureful lifestyle. And this is why this is a conversation between me, expert on quantum science, and you, who is relatively a business person because you were into management uh, before. And so, give us your thoughts. How do you think the change can occur? How do we go through, overcome this huge resistance of the media to talk about anything good that is happening around the world?
Well, I think instead of going for the big chunk, that's the governments and the media establishment, the military industrial complex that you talked about with huge amount of vested interest, there is no easy way, or if in my mind, there is no way to break through, at least in the short term, into these things and change the perspective. What I feel is that it is the onus of the individual people, the people like us, who can adopt this worldview and start making a change inside ourselves. It is like bottom up, not top down. This is how I feel this thing can really make an impact from a practical point of view. No government is going to give up popularity, or no business, such huge businesses are not going to give up their piles of money. No way. When they see that granular way, normal people, they are asking for certain things. They are asking for uh, non-local ideas, or as you pointed out in your book, the softer aspect, not the materialist, non-materialist aspects of business. When those demands go up, these businesses who are hungry for profits anyway, they will automatically take a shift towards things which are more conducive to the environment. So I believe at this point, the best bet is on ourselves, not on the government, not on the business, not on the media. So and I must point out that if anyone really wants to look at how the worldview is and how this is going to benefit, one big demarcation that you placed a while back: pleasure versus happiness. And that's so huge. When people understand, yes, this happiness is what it is, pleasure is just molecular, and there is beyond molecule, all those things put together. If people are really in the pursuit of happiness, I believe a lot of these problems that we are talking about today will be history, and people will learn how collectively small people save the world from assured destruction. This is my
Yes,
take.
I guess you are right. That probably is where we stand. We do what we can today and gradually build up the public opinion, but it will be a very slow process, and therefore the crisis will catch up with us, and people have to be ready for that. Compounding these difficulties, of course, there is the crisis of democracy itself. And if we don't already have enough problem, autocratic government will make it much worse, as you can see in China. China was a relatively benign country as far as pollution of the environment was concerned. Today, the situation is completely different. Except for United States, China is the biggest polluter of the world. And uh, this is mainly because of the dictatorial government there. The America, at least the government today, uh, does not actively, this particular government in place now does not actively push pollution. Instead, they're actively pushing the way to get away from pollution. This much can be said in favor of them. But of course, that will change. The winds of change is such that dictatorship may very well come to America. Today, some 7 to 9 countries, Russia, China, uh, Turkey, Belarus, one of the latest to join this group, Iran, uh, some of the Middle Eastern countries as well, Syria. All these countries are dictatorial countries already. And if America joins that group, what holds America back? People don't understand how sensitive this situation is. What holds it back is the military. The military has a tradition of not intervening into people's affairs, but that can easily change because military, after all, has ties into this industrial academic complex. And if they are influenced and they start intervening in uh, political affairs, American democracy will be a thing of the past. These are very serious threats, just as the global climate change is a very serious threat. Crisis has already come. We are still not waking up to it. And media is so callous about this. This is the amazing thing. They would still emphasize only trivial things like what Trump is doing. Is he farting today or is he not farting? This is the kind of thing that they pay attention to because it sells. Instead of going into some of the good things that are happening that people can do. I'll tell you this. Quite a few years ago, this was the time when conservation of energy from people's point of view, people talked about a lot. So I went to a hotel in London. I was so impressed. There was a sign, a little card saying 3 R's. And what are the 3 R's? Well, reuse, which the hotel was already pushing. Don't demand a towel every day. Use the same towel during your stay, which people were actually doing because after all, they do that in home at home all the time. And then second was recycle. And that too was gradually becoming fashionable. Right now it has become too expensive. People are not doing that anymore. Um, and then the third one, this was the one that attracted my attention. It's that reduce. I was so heartened, so energized. They are actually talking about conserve energy, reduce, because this is one of the things hotel guests do because they are expending somebody else's money in terms of electricity. They don't care if they leave the air conditioner on when they leave their room and so forth. So that was real progress that was going on. But of course, over the years, we forgot about this third R, forgot about the second R also, recycling. Reuse, maybe people still do it, maybe not. But we have really forgotten every bit of what, at the personal level, we can do to protect our precious environments that gives us sustainability for life itself, not just the economy, life itself. If water is not available, if my home gets flooded out of existence or just submerges into the ocean, this kind of thing is already taking place. And we are still not listening to it because the media, the stupid media, will not emphasize these stories and what we can do about it because people are doing something about it rather than they would talk about trivial things all the time. We have become a society and culture of trivial pursuit everywhere.
Yeah, so Hollywood is quite famous in making doomsday movies. There are many. What we are looking at is a real doomsday sort of situation coming at us at a very rapid pace. And unless we pay very good attention to it, We are ready for it. Times are going to be hard. Now, this is not a great thing to end a talk with a grave note, but sometimes a little bit of warning is necessary. And if you want to know more about what we do, please visit www.amitgoswami.org. You will know quite a bit about the work that Professor Goswami is doing. You can also reach us at info@amitgoswami.org if you have any specific questions. We'll be happy to answer. Now, one uh, little thought of encouragement that came to my mind is that yes, our civilization did face a series of critically dangerous situations in the past too. And somehow we have managed to come out of it. Call it the movement of consciousness, call it whatever you like. But we have a real chance of avoiding these calamities that we are talking about today, provided we act now. So we suggest you visit our website, look at what quantum worldview is, and get back to us with your thoughts. Thank you for being with us, Professor Goswami. Thank you so much for giving us.
Thanks, everyone.